everybody, and thank you so much for coming today for our what's normally our legislative update. We are Secular AZ. We are a 501c3 organization focused on protecting the Constitution and the separation of church and state for well over a decade now. Normally on Fridays, we give a legislative update of all things happening at the Capitol, but these past few weeks, very little legislative work is actually happening. It seems that the majority party members aren't on the same page when it comes to the budget, and they're still not allowing the minority party a seat at the table during these negotiations. So this week, we decided to provide an update about the leaked SCOTUS opinion that came out earlier this week. Today, we're going to speak with one of my favorite people, attorney and reproductive rights expert, Julie Gunnigle. Julie is an Arizona native with a law degree from Notre Dame. After her run in 2020 for Maricopa County attorney, missing that seat by just 1.5% of the vote, Julie continued to work for the most vulnerable members of our community, including child victims of sexual abuse, elderly people mistreated in assisted living, wrongly evicted families, and women escaping domestic violence, just to name a few. This past year, she worked as the political director for AZ Normal and expunged the criminal records of hundreds, thousands?
We're at almost 2,000, yeah.
Wow, of the people convicted of marijuana drug charges. Currently, she is running for Maricopa County attorney in a special election, but today she's here to talk about the recent SCOTUS leak and what it means here in Arizona and how this decision is a direct attack on the Establishment Clause and the separation of church and state. So without any further ado, welcome, Julie. I'm so glad to see you, even though it's virtually.
I'm delighted to see you too.
So is there anything that I missed in your bio? Because I know you've been a very busy woman the last year or so after your 2020 election. What else did I miss? Is there anything?
You know, there is one thing that I would flag because I have never left the fight for reproductive justice in Arizona. I know most people know that I've been practicing for 17 years. And since I've been an Arizona licensed attorney, I give 500 hours a year to these causes, right? And there's been even big movement in the last year. You know, can I brag for one hot second? Okay, one of the things that we got over the finish line that has not gotten the attention that it deserves is the Department of Child Safety was still separating families and charging people with neglect for consumption of cannabis while pregnant, even under doctor's orders, and even when it was therapeutic, and even when it was life-saving. And we had a big win on this, what I view as a reproductive justice front, just a few weeks ago in the Court of Appeals Division 1.
Sorry about that. That's great. I mean, it's just your track record is that of somebody who's completely focused on the most vulnerable members of our community, you know, and really fighting for criminal justice reform. I'm so lucky to have met you a couple of years ago, and I look forward to a continued friendship for many years to come. So let's just dig right in. I think that we all kind of knew what was going to be happening in the Supreme Court this time around, but this leak, first of all, it's kind of unprecedented from what I'm reading. Like these leaks don't really happen. And I know that there's a lot of speculation about who leaked it. You know, some people are saying somebody on the left, some people are saying somebody on the right. It doesn't really matter. It's been leaked now. So can you briefly explain the Supreme Court's case that Justice Alito, his opinion was referencing?
Sure. So for those who've been following along in this fight, this is a leaked opinion about the Mississippi case. The idea is a direct attack on Roe. So 98 pages of a proposed draft opinion was leaked, and it is what everybody feared. I can tell you that reproductive justice lawyers have been meeting over the last several months to try to tease out what the possible repercussions are. Like, where is the court going to go? And we kind of ranked them into three different eventualities, right? Like, are we going to see the court just tailor Roe and make an undue burden, even more onerous and keep the Casey framework and the trimester framework together? Are we going to see an intermediate step, or are we going to see the worst possible outcome, which is outright overruling Roe? And we saw the court, or at least in this draft opinion, outright overruling Roe. Now, one of the things that I want to make absolutely clear just at the outset is that abortion remains safe and legal here in the state of Arizona and will for the foreseeable future. It looks like this opinion, we're anticipating it dropping in June. And even from there, we'll talk a little bit about the legal technicalities. It won't necessarily happen overnight here in Arizona if we think some of these bans on abortion or contraceptives will occur.
Okay, so yeah, you said that there are 3 scenarios that it could be. Do you have any feeling one way or the other where they're going to land? I mean, it's so hard to speculate at this point, I guess.
I mean, the opinion is the worst possible outcome. The opinion overrules Roe. And brief constitutional law lesson. Okay, so why this matters so stinking much to Arizona families is that Roe is kind of the bedrock of our personal privacy jurisprudence. All of the big cases that you can think that are post 1973 that validated rights like being able to love who you want, have sexual relations with who you want, build a family with who you want, parent the way you want to parent, they're all embedded in this Roe idea of privacy. And right before Roe, there was a case called Griswold v. Connecticut. And that was the idea that everyone has a personal privacy right to be able to access contraception without interference from the criminal law. So a lot of people are theorizing like we're outrightly overruling Roe, and Roe relies on Griswold, that it's not necessarily just abortion rights. It's not just our right to marry who we love that's now potentially in jeopardy, but it's, rights as basic as being able to access contraceptives that are invoked in this opinion as well.
Yeah, and I see Diane Post, who's the head of our legal team here at Secular AZ, has her hand up. So Diane, did you have a question or did you want to add something? Go ahead.
No, it was a mistake.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So you kind of, so you referenced the fact that this could mean that things like interracial marriage could go away, gay marriage could go away. We're seeing this kind of chipping away at the Establishment Clause and the separation of church and state. Now, I know that here in Arizona, well, first of all, this year, Governor Ducey signed SB 1164 into law, which would ban abortions after 15 weeks. So when does that law go into effect?
Sure, great question. So that law will go into effect 90 days after sine die. That means after adjournment of the legislature. We're expecting a budget soon, so September-ish will be the proposed implementation date.
Okay. And for those of you who are in this webinar, if you have any questions for Julie, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We'd love to hear what you think about this. So let's talk a little bit about not just the newest abortion ban, the 15-week abortion ban 1164, but I know that there are other laws in the book, some that are 100 years old or so. Can you talk about those a little bit and what would happen if the Supreme Court decision goes the way that we don't want it to go?
Sure. I mean, there's 3 that I'm really concerned with. Just to flag and kind of close the loop on 1164, that 15-week ban has no exceptions, even in the case of rape or no exceptions for rape or incest. And that's what makes it, frankly, extra terrifying. There's a multitude of laws that are potentially now enforceable. I think the 3 that will most affect Arizona families are 2 of our bans that go back to the territorial days. One you can find in 3603 and 3605. One bans the provision of abortion services. It more or less is targeted toward providers, but there are ways that a zealous prosecutor could turn that easily against patients. We saw that in the pre-Roe days, that folks could become an accomplice to their own abortion and be criminalized and caught up in it. We've also seen that same territorial law creates a ban on contraceptives. So depending on how far reaching this opinion is, if it goes to rights like Griswold, it would create a misdemeanor offense for anyone who writes a prescription or advertises contraceptives. And it would have the force and effect of making contraception a crime here in the state of Arizona. The third law that I wanted to highlight for y'all, it comes from 2 legislative sessions ago, SB 1457. A lot of that law was enjoined. That was our fetal abnormalities law. And the portion of that prohibits abortion based on genetic abnormalities is at least hypothetically enjoined while we sort out what that means under Roe. But part of it did go into force. And the part that went into force, in my view, is the scariest of all of these laws in its scope and possible interpretation. The legislature said that a fertilized egg has, quote, the same rights, privileges, and immunities as you or I. And that's troubling because we've seen in other states where they've implemented these sorts of fetal personhood laws, is we've seen all sorts of folks caught up in the criminalization of pregnancy and primarily targeting our most vulnerable populations. There have been over 1,600 prosecutions based on pregnancy, and there are from things as benign as someone like, for example, my client who chose to medicate with cannabis, being caught up in the criminal law based on the idea that her fetus is a person and they needed to be protected from ingesting a substance, to ideas as outrageous as an Alabama woman who was shot in the abdomen by someone else. And she was caught into the criminal system based on the idea that she has to avoid unnecessary altercations. And she was criminalized for being shot while pregnant. So I know your mouth is hanging open, but this is not new. This is not unusual. This is the probable consequence of enforcing a fetal personhood law here in the state of Arizona.
I mean, it's just, it's mind-boggling, really, because, I'm a person, it completely disregards the personhood of the person that's pregnant. It's just crazy to me. Sorry for the shock, because that one really, really surprised me. I had not heard about that one before. So let's see. I have a question coming from Dawn in the audience, and Dawn actually was one of the great volunteers who showed up this past week at the Rainbows Festival. So thank you for that, Dawn. And she says, what are you doing about challenging the legislature on the grounds of religious freedom for those who are not extremist Christians, specifically Jews who have a 1,000-year+ history, even written into the Bible, that a fetus is not viable until birth? So, okay, that was a really long question. So what are you doing to challenge the legislature on the grounds of religious freedom?
Yeah, I mean, what am I personally doing? So I'm a board member of the National Council for Jewish Women, and we are one of the plaintiffs in the fetal personhood lawsuit. And we challenged this head on because you're right. This idea that somehow life begins upon conception is a fundamentally religious belief. And it's not even agreed upon amongst all Christians. Never mind when you get into the Jewish faith, where we believe that the soul enters the body upon the first breath, or in the Islamic tradition, where it's very clear that rights of a fetus are always subordinated to the rights of the person carrying it. And what we're seeing in a law like that is we're seeing one small extremist group religious view imposed upon all of us, and that's wrong. So, I mean, there have been lawsuits. There is the possibility of enjoining that portion again, depending on how the litigation plays out. I'm not hopeful, but this is an issue, and everybody sees it coming. And Dawn, you're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So let's go ahead and go to the next question. This one, I'm not sure who it's coming from, but it says, Arizona Agenda has said that prosecutors and candidates are being asked if they would enforce the abortion ban in Arizona. Would it be possible for local county attorneys to refuse to enforce the abortion ban? And what would happen if they did? Now, I want to point out that we are a nonpartisan organization. I do realize that Julie is running for county superintendent here in Maricopa County. This is not an endorsement, but I would love to hear your perspective on this question. I think it's a great question.
Every candidate running for a law enforcement office this cycle needs to be asked this question. My view is, when should your county attorney be enforcing any abortion ban or using the criminal law to enforce an abortion ban? Not now, not ever. This is not a place where the government belongs. And including police and prosecutors. Now, I think the corollary to that question is that even something a county attorney can say at the outset, that they're not going to enforce a particular law? And I just want to make clear that that is literally part of the job description for folks who are applying to be your attorney general or your Maricopa County attorney. While the legislature writes the laws, your county attorney is in charge of how they're going to be enforced. And that means this idea of prosecutorial discretion. It means that your county attorneys should always be working in the interest of justice. And part of that inquiry is, are these cases that you can win? And when 80% of Arizona doesn't want to see the criminal law used in this way, I don't think there's a good likelihood of conviction. Further, they're also charged with deciding whether or not this is a good use of taxpayer resources. And right now, the county attorney's office only takes about half of the cases that's referred to it. So these decisions are already being made, what is prosecuted and what is not. And frankly, the county attorney's offices haven't been forthright and honest about what they're choosing to prosecute and use their discretion on. So I believe it's imperative that you get those bold statements and you get commitments from candidates. And then from the AG's perspective, I mean, I think this is equally important. Keep in mind, your AG is not just in charge when it comes to, for example, supervising your county attorneys or even bringing cases, but they're also the people that advise your medical boards. And so when we talk about licensure in our state, a lot of these decisions about doctors being able to continue to practice are going to come down to who's in your AG's office as well.
Wow. So really, really important elections coming up for sure. There is a comment in the chat right now, and I actually read something about this today because the Satanic Temple, which is a recognized, congregation, and we all know what they're doing, right? They're doing those legal challenges, which I think is brilliant, but they specifically protect the right to choose. I'm curious about your opinion. Do you think there could be a pushback with an organization like the Satanic Temple to say, our abortion rituals need to be protected because they are our religious expression?
Have at it. No, I mean, quite seriously, if the court is saying that you don't have a right to privacy now under the 14th Amendment, there's room now for innovative legal theories. Frankly, it's shameful to me that, rights to bodily autonomy would be subordinated to rights to practice a religion freely. But nevertheless, here we are. And in light of that opinion, I think that's an interesting legal tact. I'd love to see what the court does with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this one is coming from Diane. She says, there is a permanent injunction on the Arizona criminal law statute since 1975 or so, and no one seems to know about it. Are you aware?
Yes. So I think Diane and I have been sitting in on the same legal roundtables for the last several months as they're trying to figure out what the implications of a reversal of Roe would be. So we have an older case. It's Planned Parenthood v. Nelson, I believe is what Diane is referencing, that enjoins 3 of our territorial laws, the 2 that I mentioned, and one that's already been repealed by the legislature. So it's one of the reasons why I'm cagey about telling people, like, on this day all of our rights go away, because removing that injunction and relitigating it is kind of the final step to whether or not those very old laws become enforced. I think it's a very open question whether or not, if they were to be removed, whether that would be a one day in court process or if it would be a years-long appellate process while we wait to see how everything plays out. But as usual, Diane Post is absolutely right. At least those 3 laws. So the 2-year mandatory minimum for providing abortions up to 5 years in prison, and the contraceptives law that makes it a misdemeanor are at least theoretically enjoined until we hear otherwise.
Okay. All right. Next question. This one says, is there currently a law in Arizona that prohibits abortion based on race or sex? They go on to say it was part of ARS 13-3603, same place as the genetic abnormality one, but I can't tell if it's on the books or not enforceable.
So my understanding with respect to that case, because I believe that case was brought and ultimately that case was unsuccessful. So and Diane will correct me if and when I'm wrong, but those are at least theoretically on the books right now. To my knowledge, they have not been enforced, but they are not enjoined by the court.
Great.
And frankly, that was something that we looked at when pursuing the 1457 case too. Do we want to wrap up race and sex based reason bans into that case as well? And I think ultimately the decision was no, that the court wasn't going to be receptive to that.
Okay. The next question comes from Kathy. And I think I may know the answer to this one already. In the state of Michigan, a ballot initiative has been created to remove pre-Roe law criminalizing abortions. Do you think this is a viable option for Arizona?
All right. I have to bring out my soapbox. Please don't go down this route. Let me just talk a little bit about why this is a terrible idea. If reproductive rights are on life support, we need everyone to get out and in certain races for certain candidates who will protect those rights. That's my view. It would be a mammoth distraction to try to get all of those ballot signatures. And I believe we're only 6 weeks away from the deadline. And you're telling me we're going to put all of our resources into gathering all of these signatures, which by the way, have to be in person and on paper and verified, and then go through a challenge process to theoretically place this on a ballot, get it funded, because these ballot initiatives are not cheap, y'all. I mean, even an inexpensive ballot initiative, you're talking at least a $4 million raise. We're going to do all of that. And then we're going to watch it get dismantled by a Supreme Court that has hostily rejected time after time attempts to place these issues that are most important to us onto the ballot. What a mammoth distraction when we can start targeting these races and starting to, get out for candidates who share values. That just seems like a mammoth waste of time. And then to add to it, on what planet are our rights, or should our rights ever be up for the popular vote? Like, my understanding is that is why we have a constitution, to protect discrete and insular minorities who cannot protect their rights via the democratic process. And to just do an up or down vote, are women really people? I worry about what the outcome of that vote would be, but even what it says to place something like that on the ballot.
Great. Yeah, I see Edward had a similar question and it's already been answered. Let's see, here's another question. I live in Prescott Valley. There's absolutely no way we can get any support for any pro-life sorts of any ordinances. I'm wondering if they mean pro-choice laws or whatever you want to call them. We would actually be in life-threatening situations if we tried to push for any pro-choice information or ordinances. So what can we do?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's a huge issue. Even if we still have the right to an abortion here in our state, do we have access? And the reality for so many Arizona pregnant people and families is that we don't have access in large swaths of our state, and folks are traveling. On average right now, we're hearing, I think it was 17 miles is what I heard. If these bans go into place, the average length of travel will be over 260 miles to access abortion and reproductive justice services. It's shameful. What can we do? I don't know what you do in Prescott Valley apart from organizing and knocking the doors and highlighting these issues for people. This is an education issue, and it seems like we need to change a whole bunch of minds, or at least get them to the polls if we're going to have any real power. I also just want to highlight, because I've seen in the last couple of days people saying it's shameful that this is happening under a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic House of Representatives. And I agree. Nevertheless, that helplessness and that idea that, your vote doesn't matter, I think we all need to firmly reject as well. That is an intentional design to make us, reject the electoral process. And we need to be more engaged than ever, in my view.
Agreed. And I'd like to point out, and Sharon on the chat agrees that everyone's energy should be focused on electing supportive candidates and registering like-minded voters and getting them to the polls. Absolutely. I was inspired Tuesday, I guess. I think you were there, but we didn't see each other at the Capitol. What I saw was a lot of young people, and and even more inspiring was that there were a lot of young men there as well. With the millennial Gen Z kind of generation, they're showing up. And so they are inspiring. So one thing that I want to say too is if you are in a place where you are solidly red, right? Or like you have, again, this is nonpartisan, but if you have representation at the legislature that is not going to protect bodily autonomy and a person's right to getting an abortion and making those decisions with their doctors, there are districts where you can put your weight behind somebody else. The same goes for if you're in a solidly blue district, right? You have the kind of representation and maybe even a crowded primary playing field. Put your weight behind some of those districts that we could actually flip, because just because somebody isn't in your district doesn't mean that they can't represent you at the legislative level. So I think that that's really important. And I'm just so tired of these ballot initiatives that inevitably are getting thrown out by the courts anyway. If you need a hobby this summer, I'm sure that there are candidates that would love to have your volunteer legs to walk in the 115-degree heat. It's really fun though to talk to voters. Okay, let's see. The Arizona Constitution has a right to privacy. How does that affect the abortion ban in Arizona? That one's from Buff.
Nobody quite knows, but let's play out through a few different scenarios. So you're absolutely right. The Arizona Constitution has an explicit right to privacy that's different than how we derive the right to privacy from the United States Constitution. In Roe, the court found a right to privacy based on the 14th Amendment. In Arizona, it's far more explicit. That being said, what does it actually mean is a very open question. So when we talk about removing, especially those injunctions that prevent prosecutors from imprisoning people based on these, 100-year-old laws, I expect that's one of the issues that you'll see. Does the Arizona Constitution protect us more than the United States Constitution? Because keep in mind, the United States Constitution is a floor, not a ceiling. What it says is states, this is the base level of rights that you can provide to your citizens. You can always provide more. I'm not especially hopeful, even though I've heard that argument made, because in other instances where people have tried to litigate the Arizona right to privacy, the court has found that it's interpreted in tandem to the United States Constitution. So I worry that that's a distraction or a Hail Mary that's potentially getting more attention than it deserves, when we really ought to be focusing on issues like education and organizing. But it certainly is one outlet that people can use to litigate.
All right, this is a good question too. Aside from the privacy issue, what about the issue that one can't be forced to donate blood, kidneys, stem cells, etc., even if another's life would depend on it? So why can women be forced to give their bodies and 9 months of their life and liberty to a fetus? Great question.
Preaching to the choir on that one. I mean, so just to take you through, because this is my bread and butter, y'all. Before I worked with Normal and the Poor People's Campaign, I did a lot of litigation for especially moms in labor. And it plays right into it. There's an old case called McFarland v. Schempp that litigated this exact idea. I believe in that case, it was an uncle, and he was being asked to donate a body part to someone who would die if they didn't get that donation. And the case got litigated, and there was a finding that no, you can never sacrifice your own or be forced by the state to sacrifice your own bodily autonomy for another person. Now, curiously, that doesn't seem to apply to women, frankly, and pregnant people, because what we've seen time and time again, and there have been a multitude of cases that, for example, a person in labor where a doctor recommends a C-section because they are worried about the health of the fetus, and the woman has said no upon having proper informed consent and the ability to refuse, and the court has forced that person into having a C-section. So we have seen those cases, and it is just uniformly weaponized against pregnant people. And yeah, I mean, this is absolutely nothing new.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's absolutely nothing new. So I want to just put it out there again, see if anybody has any further questions. Our legislative updates tend to be anywhere between a half hour and an hour or so. So if there's any other last questions, please go ahead and put them in there. I also wanted to share some resources because, as Julie stated earlier, abortion is still legal. You can still access abortion. And I know that a lot of our members are probably wondering, like, how can I not go crazy over this decision? So I want to put some of those resources in there. Oh, wait, there's one more question though. Okay, what about the possibility of mandating child support from fathers and or the parents of underage fathers that might stop a few unwanted pregnancies?
Yeah, I mean, I believe a lot of that is already the law with respect to child support. I don't know that there's a tie to the parents of underage fathers, but here's what I worry about. You know, we've seen how this is ideologically inconsistent, right? How other fully formed humans can't be forced to sacrifice themselves. And then there's this carve out for pregnant people. I don't believe that any of these other sorts of tactics, even recentering the conversation around the fact that people don't get pregnant by themselves. I mean, that doesn't happen. I'm not convinced that reframing that conversation to talk about the fathers or the people that impregnate pregnant people seeking abortion care will result in anything, because this is not really about a religious belief. If this was about a religious belief, we would have seen this apply to, for example, IVF, which is a specific carve out under the fetal personhood statute. This is only about a fertilized egg once it's inside another human and efforts to control the other human. And anything that centers the conversation other than that patient who is seeking care, I'm not worried. I'm worried it's not a great use of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I mean, for those of you who actually come to my legislative updates on Fridays, the overarching theme, it seems, with this legislative session and building up for the last several legislative sessions is power and control, and at times some of these bills that are just in a flurry moving through our legislature, it seems like the cruelty is the point. And it is this last gasp or this last grasp at power and control, because many people who have traditionally been in power and been controlling things are feeling threatened right now. So we're seeing some of the worst authoritarian kind of legislation moving, not just in this state, but in so many other states. So I've got another question. This one it says, what is the best thing that people can do to support pro-choice candidates? I think we kind of touched on this, but if you want to add anything, Julie.
Yeah, I adopt a candidate, y'all. Find someone who you really care about and contact their campaign, see what they need. I know folks have needs as diverse as getting out, registering voters, talking to voters, relational organizing. This is the idea that I text 5 friends and tell them how great a particular candidate is on issues that I care about. Everybody, frankly, needs money and resources. There's a lot of need out there. Find a campaign you care about and ask them directly.
Yeah, and the number one way to to change the makeup of the legislature, and it really stinks as the number one way here in Arizona, but it is knocking doors. So if you do as Julie says and find a candidate that you want to support, they will give you plenty of opportunities to knock on those doors and have conversations with voters. All right, I've got another question. Anita asks, if you are county attorney and you refuse to prosecute these abortion cases, are you expecting any negative consequences for yourself? Good question.
Yeah, but this isn't about me.
Let's just say hypothetically, though, if we have a county attorney, whether it's here, Pinal County, Cochise, whatever, and they refuse to do that, would that person get in trouble? What would be the repercussions for that?
Sure. Okay. So there's maybe 2 pieces to tease it apart. There are legal repercussions for that. And the answer to that legal question is no, your county attorney is empowered to choose which cases to take and how to exercise their discretion. Frankly, I think my comments about abortion are getting all of this attention because it's just refreshingly honest. Normally, these decisions are made behind closed doors and people aren't transparent about it. But it is almost entirely unreviewable, the decision of a county attorney to take a case or not take a case, which means that we're not expecting these decisions can't be appealed to a higher court. And the only real check on some of that power is a law that frankly hasn't been fully interpreted. And we don't know what it means, that the attorney general can supervise all 15 county attorneys. And it's a little unclear what the supervision part means. I think that in my view, that means that we need to make sure that we both have a county attorney, but also an AG who shares their values, so that we never have to find out what the scope of supervision means. I think there's also political ramifications to being bold and unapologetic on this issue. If you ever visit my Twitter feed, you can see some of the nasty, hateful things. What you aren't seeing is some of the behind the scenes death threats that have already happened. But yeah, there's a cost for being bold and taking a courageous stand. And I mean, that's something I'm prepared to take. This is far too important. When I tuck in my 2 little girls at night and know that they are more likely to die in childbirth than I was, and that I'm twice as likely as my mother to die in childbirth, that they're not going to grow up with the same gamut of reproductive rights, that if they are sexually assaulted, it is highly unlikely that your county attorney will take that case, but it's highly likely that they could be found criminally liable for having an abortion if they become pregnant. I mean, all of these issues, like this is what keeps me up at night. This next generation needs us to fight.
Yeah. And again, I'm glad to see them standing up too. The age at that rally the other day. I mean, so many people in their 20s. It was really inspiring. There's another question. Okay, let me see if requiring men to support pregnant women means that he would have some sort of say of what happens to the child. So if the woman is forced to have the child, does it not mean that she has to put up with his abuse? Yeah.
That's a really good question. So to my knowledge, we had a piece of legislation that made it through. I forget if it was this session or last, that removed from the law a bit that would have allowed, in particular, rapists to have that level of control over both their victim and if the person were to become pregnant, that offspring, because that was on the books for a long time, giving them, for example, access and the same parenting rights that any other like union would have had, and that's shameful. So that part is gone. What will happen in terms of coercing people into parenting situations that they don't want to be in instances other than sexual assault? I mean, I share your concern.
Yeah. And it's, this is the same time too, because it drives me absolutely crazy, the hypocrisy. At the same time that Ducey signed 1164, he also signed 1399, which would limit prospective adoptive and foster parents from being able to adopt if the taxpayer funded adoption or foster agency is religious and their religion doesn't match with them. This is the same state that has just historically underfunded and slashed the funding for education. So to say that this is about the poor preborn children, they really don't care about what happens to them once they're outside of the womb. So this isn't really about, I agree. You said earlier that this isn't about religion. Yes, it's the guise of religion, it seems, and certainly the followers maybe believe that, but this is about power and control, and it's about just essentially dominating one whole group of people over another.
That's all right. Exactly right. If we cared about babies, we would make sure. I mean, it's not even once folks are born, actually. We have a maternity healthcare system in Arizona that is failing moms. If we cared about babies, we would fix it. If we cared about babies, we would make childcare affordable. If we cared about babies, we would make sure that everyone had access to Access and WIC. If we cared about babies, we'd fully fund public education. This isn't about babies.
It certainly isn't. You know, I think too, I think it was maybe back in 2017 or 18. And I know that Representative Kelly Butler has brought this bill back year after year. And it was, you know, in a year where it was like $11 billion budget, I think it was $700,000 to fund dental care for pregnant people on access. And it gets shut down every year, you know, because we know that when you have, you know, problems with your teeth, it could manifest into other parts of your body and make you really sick and even kill you. And especially when you're pregnant. So the fact that they year after year reject Kelly Butler's, you know, amendment for the budget to try to get that in there is just, you know, it exposes their hypocrisy. Thank you to Jude for putting up who's running. So there is a link there for the for people that are running and have primaries and that kind of stuff. So let's see. What should we be looking out for in the Roe decision to see if Arizona would institute a total abortion ban or a 15-week ban? Right now, people can get an abortion in AZ until what week? Question mark.
Until what week in this moment? I believe the answer is 24 in most circumstances. The timeline that we're looking out for and how we expect this to play out is I expect that we're going to see a Roe decision in June. After Roe, we are going to see the 15-week ban implemented 90 days after sine die. So that puts it at September. Somewhere between June and September, we're going to see the issue litigated about the total abortion ban in our state. And I expect that's going to get a ton of coverage.
Okay, and I am going to go ahead and put in here some links for how you can perhaps support. Now, unfortunately, the links you'll have to like copy and paste because the links don't show through in this chat. I know that our communications director is also going to be putting these out in our newsletter and our action alert this week. So keep an eye open for that, because a lot of people do feel frustrated and like, what can we do? So in the meantime, there are organizations that provide funding for people who need an abortion, transportation. I did hear today that apparently Congress or White House, I don't know, that they're talking about the possibility of opening up Medicaid dollars to assist people who are living in a state like Arizona, Texas, Florida, wherever, and they can't access abortion. Do you think that's likely to happen? Do you think it would be I don't know. Do you think it would be likely to happen if we were to provide funding for those kinds of situations?
You know, I do want to see Congress, for example, use the power of the purse strings in these instances. So I am hopeful, but getting any action right now is from Washington, I think is really difficult. I'd also like to see the federal government take a hard look at funding prosecutors' offices who decide to engage in this kind of behavior as well. It seems to me that there still is a role for the federal government, even if we can't, for example, get Roe codified, to use spending in order to influence what's happening on the ground in states where the threats are as grave as they are in Arizona.
So, you know, just to kind of what will happen? Okay, let's just say that everything happens the way that we don't want it to. What are people's options going to be with regards to where they can access safe abortions? I mean, California, right? I mean, Mexico?
All right, so I mean, maybe we should just be really real and honest. Like, wealthy people and white people are always going to have access to abortion one way or another in our state. Folks who are living right there on the margins aren't. And whether it be through travel, we are fortunate in Arizona to be surrounded by so many other states that have been, frankly, so good and open when it comes to having access. That is not so much my worry. My worry is all of the marginalized folks in Arizona where access is going to be nearly totally removed. I don't want to give the legislature any bad ideas, but I can't imagine that they're not already thinking of a travel ban. We have seen some other states try to pass through a travel ban that would ban the out-of-state travel to get an abortion. And We'll see what actions, if any, our legislature chooses to take. In my view, it's incredibly dangerous that they're still in session right now as this is playing out. And who knows what discussions are happening behind closed doors as to whether or not they're formulating a trigger law, a true trigger law, and not, for example, these older bans that we have in Arizona, or if they're thinking of putting in any of the other, travel-based restrictions, or the frankly vigilante law that we saw out of Texas that allows civil suits for folks who are seeking abortions.
Yeah. Great question. Mike says, how can it possibly be legal to ban travel to another state? Great question. We've seen it happen. I think it was Missouri most recently, or Oklahoma even, because of we really are living in the Handmaid's Tale right now. The question here from Diane, though, is wouldn't a travel ban violate the federal constitution right to travel?
Yes, Diane is absolutely right. That being said, I also thought that cases like Roe were still good law. Who knows if Heart of Atlanta is still good law with this court?
Yeah. There's another good point too. Dawn says, we need to know which judges to vote for during elections. And I agree. And I think it's Deidre Abood would always post every election cycle. She has a very comprehensive list of judges and who to vote for and who not to. Is there like a one-stop shop for people once November comes around and they're looking at that giant section of judges? Is there somewhere that they can go to get that information, Julie?
Yeah, there's two places that I rely on. First, I believe Deidre has made it available through Civic Engagement Beyond Voting. They have that Judicial Resource Center. And what I like about that resource is it breaks down all of the judges. And then if the recommendation is to retain or not retain, the reasons why. Because I always find the reasons to be the most powerful part. The other resource is there are groups that get together and committees to rank judges and make recommendations on retention as well. And that comes through the court system. And you can find I believe it'll be on the Maricopa County Superior Court. You can find the judicial retention list and rankings.
That's
gavel
great.
watch. Yes, Jude, the gavel watch. Thank you for helping me find the words.
Yeah. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions here. And to be quite honest, while it was a very good discussion, these are just kind of dark times, and it's Friday. I want everybody to have a nice weekend, but I want everybody to really take that to heart. Find a candidate that is going to support everyone's right to privacy, their right to bodily autonomy, and throw your weight behind those candidates, because right now, currently at the legislature, it is a balance of 31 to 29 in the House and 16 to 14 in the Senate. And if we're able to flip a seat in each of those chambers, we won't have to worry about this kind of stuff coming up anymore. And also, if you are in a district where you maybe do have a crowded primary, do the homework on those candidates, because just because they have a certain letter after their name doesn't necessarily mean that they are pro-choice or that they are about the separation of church and state. So do your research on those candidates. Julie, is there anything else that maybe you could leave us with some hope or a call to action or something, so we're not just immediately going to the liquor cabinet after this meeting?
I mean, that is also a choice. Nevertheless, this is not hopeless. It's really not, but it is a last stand. If we don't make the changes necessary in Arizona, all Arizona families are going to be living under this post-Roe future that we don't want. And from now into November, everything is within our control. I am feeling so hopeful about the energy and the enthusiasm that I have seen over this last week. We need to bring new folks into the fold. We need to be having these conversations. We need to remember that not everybody is where we are right now, and that it took us a long time to get to the understandings that we have today. Be gentle with people coming into the movement and make sure that they are supported. But this is all within our control. But we need to work our tails off for the next 200 days.
Yeah, folks are just going to have to get outside of their comfort zone, really. And once you get started, though, it's hard to stop. I want to point out that coming up, we have the Peoria School Board candidates. Oh, is that the 19th? For some reason, I was thinking that was the 25th, but I might have that wrong. We are going to have another candidate forum. Somebody asked if we are going to have another forum like this, a webinar, if same-sex marriage is the next target. And absolutely we will. But I mean, fingers crossed, we don't get there. Either way, I just want to say thank you so much to Julie Gunnigle for all the work that you do, for taking time out of your busy schedule today and answer the questions of our members. I appreciate you very much, and I'm sure I will see you soon.
It's mutual. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day. Take care.